The conference room smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. The kind of smell hospitals never quite get rid of. 12 people sat around the long table, their name placards lined up neatly, pens ready. Risk management, legal, HR. 2 physicians I barely knew. And at the far end, my older brother, Daniel Harris, hands folded like he was saying grace. I stood near the wall. No chair for me. "Ms. Harris," the board chair said, adjusting her glasses. "You've been accused of deliberately altering patient scheduling data for personal gain." The words landed clean and sharp. No drama, no raised voices, just a sentence designed to end a career. Daniel didn't look at me when he spoke next. "She's always had trouble with boundaries," he said evenly. "Even growing up. I think the pressure finally caught up with her." A few heads nodded. Someone wrote something down. I said nothing. They waited. I could feel it, that familiar itch people get when silence doesn't behave the way they expect. Someone cleared their throat. The chair glanced at me again, clearly offering an opening. I didn't take it, because if I spoke right then, I would have told them about the late nights I spent rebuilding the clinic's intake system after it crashed. About the weekends I covered shifts no one wanted. About how Daniel hadn't worked a full week in years, yet somehow always sounded authoritative in rooms like this. But facts sound like excuses when spoken too early. So I stood there, hands relaxed at my sides, eyes forward. Let them think what they wanted. If you're following this story and you want to understand why I stayed silent in that room, why I didn't defend myself when it mattered most, consider subscribing, leaving a like, or sharing a comment. I read every single one. Truly. Now, let me tell you how I ended up standing there in the first place. My name is Laura Harris, and at the time all of this began, I was 42 years old. I worked as a patient operations coordinator at a mid-sized nonprofit hospital outside Tacoma, Washington. Not a glamorous job, not a powerful one. I didn't wear a white coat or make decisions that showed up in press releases. I kept things moving quietly. I was the person who noticed when appointment times didn't line up, when staff schedules quietly broke labor rules, when systems failed in ways that hurt people who couldn't afford delays. I fixed problems before anyone realized there had been one, which is exactly why most people assumed I didn't matter much. Daniel certainly didn't. My brother was 3 years older, charming in a way that felt practiced. He had a master's degree he liked to mention, and a habit of talking over people with confidence that sounded like competence if you didn't listen too closely. After our mother passed, he appointed himself the family spokesperson. Not officially, just naturally in his mind. I let him. At work, I dressed simply, neutral colors, comfortable shoes. I didn't correct people when they mistook me for administrative support instead of operations. I didn't volunteer details about the systems I managed or the access I had. I learned a long time ago that being underestimated gave me room to breathe. Daniel saw it as weakness. He often joked at family dinners that I was still hiding behind spreadsheets, that I played it safe, that I didn't understand the big picture. I smiled. Pass the potatoes. Let him talk. What no one saw was how closely I paid attention. I knew exactly how data flowed through the hospital, who touched it, who didn't. I knew which reports were generated automatically and which were altered manually. I knew the difference between a system error and a human decision. And I knew something was wrong months before anyone accused me of anything. No one else knew that yet. To them, I was just Laura. Quiet, reliable, unassuming, easy to blame. Daniel learned early that people believed him. Even as kids, he could explain his way out of anything. If a window broke, it was because I startled him. If homework went missing, it was because I distracted him. He said things calmly, convincingly, and adults wanted to believe him because belief was easier than sorting through details. I learned something different. I learned that telling the truth didn't always protect you, especially when someone else told a better story. The first real betrayal didn't happen in that conference room. It happened years earlier, after our mother, Eleanor Harris, had her stroke. She survived, but she was never the same. Her words came slower, her memory slipped in soft, frightening ways. I moved back to Tacoma to help care for her while Daniel stayed in Seattle, calling often, visiting rarely. He liked to tell people he was handling things behind the scenes. One afternoon, while organizing Mom's paperwork, I noticed something off. A savings account I didn't recognize. Statements addressed to Daniel using Mom's mailing address. Withdrawals that didn't align with her expenses. When I asked him about it, he laughed. "You wouldn't understand," he said lightly. "It's complicated." I let it go. Not because I believed him, but because I was tired. Tired of pushing back. Tired of being the difficult one. After Mom passed, Daniel handled the estate. Or said he did. I was grieving, numb, still showing up to work every day because routine felt safer than silence. Months later, I learned most of Mom's small investments were gone. Cashed out. Used. Daniel explained it away as necessary expenses. Legal language. Vague answers. No documentation. I didn't fight him. That was my mistake. Because what Daniel took wasn't just money. It was precedent. He learned I wouldn't challenge him publicly. That I'd swallow discomfort to keep the peace. And years later, when the hospital investigation began, he relied on that same assumption. If there was one person who truly knew me, it was my grandmother, Margaret Maggie Collins. She wasn't loud. She wasn't sentimental. She believed in three things: keeping records, telling the truth once, and letting time do its work. I spent summers with her growing up. She ran a small accounting office out of her home, long before working remotely was a concept. Everything had a folder. Everything had a date. Nothing relied on memory alone. "Memory lies when it gets tired," she used to say, tapping a file drawer. Paper doesn't. When I was 16, I once complained to her about Daniel taking credit for something I'd done at school. I expected comfort, maybe sympathy. Instead, she asked one question. "Did you document it?" I said no. She nodded. "Then next time, you'll know what to do." Maggie passed away the year before the hospital incident. Quietly. No drama. She left me very little in terms of money. Just a handwritten note and a slim metal lockbox. Inside were old ledgers, blank notebooks, and one envelope with a sentence written in her steady hand. "You don't need to be loud when you're right. You need to be ready." I thought of her often during those months, when suspicion started circling me at work. When whispers replaced conversations. When emails grew formal. While others panicked, I did what Maggie taught me. I watched, I logged, I waited. Because truth doesn't need urgency. It needs patience. If you're ready, I'll continue with Chapter 5 and Chapter 6 next, where the conflict becomes public and everything finally starts to fall apart. The email arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Subject line: Notice of internal review. It was polite, clinical, written in language that pretended neutrality while sharpening its edges. Effective immediately, my access to several internal systems would be limited, pending investigation into data irregularities. Irregularities. Such a useful word. Flexible, vague, dangerous. By the end of the day, I knew exactly where it came from. Daniel didn't accuse me directly. He never did. He understood the power of suggestion better than accusation. Instead, he submitted a concerned report to compliance, framing himself as a worried family member who had noticed patterns that didn't sit right. He attached spreadsheets. That was the part that surprised people. Daniel had never cared for details, but the documents he submitted looked convincing at first glance. Clean formatting, highlighted cells, carefully selected date ranges that suggested I'd manipulated patient scheduling to benefit certain vendors. What no one noticed yet was what he left out. Entire weeks missing. Audit trails ignored. Access logs conveniently cropped. He wasn't inventing data. He was curating it. The hospital responded exactly the way institutions do when risk is mentioned. Quiet meetings, locked doors, conversations that stopped when I entered the room. A supervisor I'd worked with for years avoided eye contact in the hallway. "Just procedural," she said softly when I asked. "You know how these things go." I did. That night, I went home and opened Maggie's lockbox. I pulled out a blank notebook and started logging everything: timestamps, emails, changes in system permissions. I didn't react. I didn't confront Daniel. I didn't send a single emotional message. Instead, I printed policies. Because policies are promises institutions make to themselves. And Daniel had broken several of them without realizing it. Suspension came the following Monday. Not termination. Not yet. Just enough distance to make me radioactive. My badge access was revoked. My hospital email locked. I was instructed not to contact staff to preserve the integrity of the review. In other words, I was erased. By Wednesday, rumors had replaced facts. I heard them secondhand from a former coworker, from a neighbor whose cousin worked in billing. She always seemed quiet. You never know with people like that. People like that. Daniel called me that night. I tried to stop this, he said, voice heavy with false regret. But they had to act. For patient safety. I let the silence stretch. You should just cooperate, he added. Make it easier on everyone. On everyone meant him. That week, I didn't leave my apartment much. I walked in the mornings, cooked simple meals, slept poorly. Doubt has a way of sneaking in when no one is speaking on your behalf. I questioned myself more than once. Had I missed something? Trusted the wrong process? Stayed quiet too long? Then I opened my notebook. The logs were clear. Access records showed edits made under Daniel's credentials during times I wasn't even in the building. Policy documents stated unequivocally that only one role his could authorize the batch changes in question. I wasn't failing. I was being buried. If you've ever reached a moment where everyone seems to believe a version of events that erases you, where staying silent feels like suffocating, leave a comment below. You don't have to explain everything. Just let it be known you're here. Stay with me. This is where the story starts to turn. When you're ready, I'll continue with Chapter 7 and Chapter 8, where a single overlooked detail changes the direction of everything. It started with a timestamp, not a dramatic discovery, not a confession, just a number that didn't behave the way it should. While reviewing the access logs I'd managed to export before my suspension, I noticed a pattern in the system edits Daniel had flagged. The changes were clustered around early mornings, between 5:10 and 5:40 a.m. That alone meant nothing. Hospitals run around the clock. People log in at odd hours all the time, except for one thing. Every modification tied to my supposed misconduct occurred during a 30-minute window when the hospital's scheduling platform automatically locked out non-administrative users for nightly maintenance. I remembered it because I'd complained about that window for years. It caused downstream delays. Everyone hated it. Everyone except the one role unaffected by the lock. Compliance administration. Daniel's role. I checked the policy manual again. Page 47. Clear as daylight. No edits permitted during maintenance unless executed through administrative override, logged separately, and tagged with the initiating user's credentials. Those override logs weren't in Daniel's submission. They couldn't be. Because if they were, his name would be. I didn't rush to tell anyone. Instead, I built a timeline. I cross-referenced system maintenance schedules with access logs. Then with Daniel's calendar, which he'd foolishly synced to a shared family account years earlier and never fully secured. Meeting in Seattle. Gym class. Breakfast with a donor. All overlapping with edits supposedly made by me in Tacoma. The number didn't lie. It sat there quietly, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. Once I saw the timestamp issue, everything else began to unravel. Daniel hadn't just altered scheduling data. He'd redirected it. By shifting patient slots and vendor assignments, he created artificial inefficiencies delays that made certain departments look mismanaged. My departments. Then, weeks later, he'd suggested solutions. External consultants, new oversight tools, firms he had informal ties to through a nonprofit board. It was subtle, layered, designed to look like proactive leadership instead of sabotage. I pulled archived emails from my personal backups, messages I'd sent months earlier flagging minor discrepancies, all unanswered. Warnings that, in hindsight, looked like a paper trail I'd built without realizing it. He hadn't expected that. People like Daniel assume silence equals ignorance. What he buried wasn't evidence of wrongdoing. It was evidence of planning. I requested a formal copy of the full audit log through my attorney, a woman named Claire Donnelly, recommended by a former colleague who owed Maggie a favor years ago. Claire didn't dramatize. She listened. Then she asked for specifics. When the logs arrived, they confirmed what I already knew. Daniel had used his administrative privileges to create the very anomalies he later reported. Not all at once, slowly, carefully, over months. I sat at my kitchen table, papers spread out, the evening light slanting through the blinds. I felt no rush of victory. No anger, just clarity. He hadn't underestimated my intelligence. He'd underestimated my patience. When you're ready, I'll continue with Chapter 9 and Chapter 10, where proof becomes unavoidable and an unexpected voice changes the outcome. Proof doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it shows up as something that simply refuses to fit any innocent explanation. For me, it was an authorization key. Buried deep in the audit logs Claire obtained was a string of characters attached to the administrative overrides, the digital equivalent of a fingerprint. Every high-level action required one. They rotated quarterly, assigned individually. Daniel's key had been active during every disputed edit. Mine had not. That alone should have ended the discussion. But institutions don't move on certainty alone. They move on process, and process demands corroboration. So we kept digging. Claire noticed something else I'd missed. Several override actions were approved from an IP address not registered to the hospital's secure network. At first glance, it looked like remote access, not unusual for administrators, except hospital policy required a secondary authorization for off-site overrides. That authorization came from a personal email account, Daniel's. The implications were no longer subtle. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a gray area. It was a direct violation of protocol, logged, time-stamped, and tied to a single individual. Claire prepared the evidence carefully. No commentary, no accusations, just documents arranged in a way that told the story on their own. "This is the kind of proof that doesn't argue," she said quietly. "It waits." I thought of Maggie then, of her file drawers, her patience. For the first time since the investigation began, I slept through the night. The call came from Marianne Lowe, the hospital's interim compliance director. She hadn't been warm during the review. Not hostile either, just distant, professional. Her voice sounded different now. "Laura," she said, using my first name for the first time in weeks, "there's something you should know." Someone had come forward. It wasn't a whistleblower in the dramatic sense. It was an analyst, Evan Price, mid-30s, quiet, recently transferred from another facility. He'd been assigned to assist Daniel during the early stages of the review. Evan had noticed inconsistencies in Daniel's explanations. Small things, dates that shifted, justifications that changed depending on who was asking. At first, he'd assumed he was missing context. Then he saw the override key. He recognized it because Daniel had once joked about it during a late meeting, bragging about the power of admin access when no one was watching. Evan hadn't spoken up right away. He'd just started the job. Daniel outranked him. The room favored confidence. But when Evan was asked to sign off on a summary report that omitted the override data entirely, something stopped him. "I didn't want to ruin anyone," he told Marianne. "I just couldn't put my name on something that wasn't true." He provided his own notes, internal messages, a timeline that matched mine almost perfectly. When Marianne told me, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief. Validation. Truth doesn't always need allies. But when it finds one, it moves faster. The conference room hadn't changed. Same disinfectant smell, same burnt coffee, same long table polished to the point of impersonality. Even the seating was nearly identical, except this time there was a chair for me. I sat. Daniel didn't. He stood near the far end, shoulders rigid, jaw tight. For the first time in my life, he looked unsure of the story he was about to tell. Marianne opened the meeting without ceremony. No preamble, no softening language. "We've completed the internal review," she said, including a secondary audit and independent verification. She didn't look at me when she spoke. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned a folder toward the board. Authorization keys, override logs, IP addresses, maintenance windows, Evan's signed statement, Claire's timeline. No adjectives, no emotion, just truth. Daniel tried once, only once. "There's context," he said. "She doesn't understand." Marianne raised a hand. "We're past interpretation." The room went quiet, in the way it does when people realize they backed the wrong certainty. I stayed silent. I didn't need to explain myself. The system already had. When Marianne finished, the board chair cleared her throat. "Mr. Harris," she said, carefully, "your access privileges are revoked, effective immediately. HR will follow up regarding next steps." Daniel looked at me then, not with anger, with something closer to disbelief, as if he still couldn't understand how the quiet one had outlasted him. I stood, gathered my notebook, nodded once to Marianne, and walked out. Justice didn't arrive with applause. It came in small, practical ways. My suspension was formally lifted. My record cleared. No press release, no apology tour. Just a quiet correction in the system that mattered most. Daniel resigned within the month. People stopped asking questions once there was nothing left to speculate about. Institutions prefer closure without spectacle. I returned to work slowly. Same desk, same systems, a little more space around me now. People listened differently. I didn't talk about Daniel. I didn't need to. His absence explained enough. On my first day back, I brought Maggie's notebook with me, placed it in my drawer. Not as a reminder of pain, but of method. Patience, records, time. They had done exactly what they were meant to do. I still see my brother occasionally at family gatherings. We are civil, distant, finished. What he lost wasn't my forgiveness. It was access to my silence, to my labor, to the version of me that absorbed consequences meant for him. I learned something important through all of this. You don't need to correct every lie. You just need to be standing when the truth arrives. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, misrepresented, or quietly blamed, thank you for staying until the end. Feel free to like, subscribe, or share this with someone who might need it. Another story is waiting for you right now.